Imagine a small farming village in Iraq, 15 kilometers from where Saddam Hussein was born, in the middle of the night in December 2003. A man is hiding inside an underground hole barely wide enough for his body, its entrance covered with nothing but a piece of styrofoam and some dirt. 8 months ago, this man commanded one of the largest armies in the Middle East and ruled 25 million people with an iron fist. Now he's lying in a coffin-sized pit, listening to the sound of 600 American soldiers closing in on his position. Suddenly the lights in the entire village go dark and boots begin pounding across the farmland above his head. As the troops reach a mud brick shack near a sheep pen, a soldier notices a rope half buried in the ground and begins to pull. They discover a trap door, and as they prepare to drop a grenade into the darkness, everyone freezes as 2 hands emerge from the hole. A bearded, filthy old man climbs out, blinking in the flashlights, and speaks his first words to his captors. "I am Saddam Hussein. I am the president of Iraq. I want to negotiate." The American soldiers' response would become legendary. President Bush sends his regards. The man who had gassed thousands of his own people, who had invaded 2 sovereign nations, who had filled mass graves across Iraq, was finally in American hands. Whether you know this story from the countless memes circulating online, or whether you lived through it and think you remember what happened, I doubt you've ever heard the full story. Because here's the thing, the most sophisticated surveillance apparatus in human history had been searching for one man for 8 months. Satellites that could read license plates from orbit, drones circling 24 hours a day, signals intelligence that could intercept any electronic communication on Earth. And all of it had failed completely. What ultimately found Saddam Hussein was something far older than any of that technology, something as ancient as civilization itself. This is how America actually found Saddam Hussein. To understand how Saddam was found, you first have to understand the man America was hunting. Saddam Hussein seized absolute power in Iraq through a bloody purge in July 1979, filmed and distributed across the country as a warning. He sat smoking a cigar as he read out the names of alleged conspirators one by one, each man led away by guards, never to be seen again. The survivors wept and pledged their loyalty on the spot, and Saddam learned a lesson he would never forget. Trust is weakness. From that moment, his entire existence was consumed by one obsession: surviving the next assassination attempt, the next coup, the next betrayal. He created multiple intelligence agencies designed to spy not just on the Iraqi people, but on each other, ensuring no one could consolidate enough power to move against him. He rotated his personal staff constantly so no one could learn his patterns, employed body doubles trained to walk and talk exactly like him. He built dozens of palaces across Iraq, monuments to his own ego, but he never stayed in any of them for long. His actual location was known only to a handful of people at any given time. And above all else, Saddam trusted only one thing: blood. His power rested on the Albu Nasir tribe, his own kinsmen from the dusty town of Tikrit in northern Iraq. Every critical position, every sensitive command, every role requiring absolute trust was filled by members of his tribe or his immediate family. Tribal loyalty, not ideology, not competence, was the foundation of everything. This system kept Saddam alive through a war with Iran that killed 1 million people, through the Gulf War, through countless assassination attempts, through decades of international isolation. It was a fortress built from human relationships rather than concrete and steel, and it would become both his greatest protection and his ultimate undoing. The hunt for Saddam began with the invasion of Iraq in March 2003, with a campaign the Pentagon called Shock and Awe. My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. The United States had assembled a coalition to remove Saddam from power, presenting evidence that he was hiding weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. Thousands of precision-guided munitions rained down on Baghdad, targeting command bunkers, communication centers, and government buildings. On the very first night, The CIA believed it had Saddam's exact location at a compound called Dora Farms. Cruise missiles and bunker-buster bombs obliterated the target in what was supposed to be a decapitation strike, cut off the head, and the body dies. But when the smoke cleared, there was no trace of Saddam Hussein. He had never been there. This pattern would repeat itself over and over in the coming weeks. Intelligence pointing to a location, a massive strike, and then nothing but rubble and questions. But if finding Saddam proved difficult, defeating his army did not. American forces, along with troops from the United Kingdom, Australia, and Poland, fought their way across the desert with astonishing speed. The Iraqi military, hollowed out by sanctions and fear, collapsed in a matter of days. Baghdad fell just 3 weeks after the initial invasion, one of the fastest military victories in modern history. On April 9, 2003, the world watched as American soldiers helped Iraqis topple a massive statue of Saddam in Firdos Square. It was supposed to be the iconic image of liberation, the moment a tyrant's grip on his people finally broke. But there was a brief moment that almost ruined the symbolism. An American soldier draped a US flag over the statue's face. The Iraqis who had gathered fell silent. This wasn't what liberation was supposed to look like. The officers realized the mistake immediately, and the flag was quickly replaced with an Iraqi one before the statue came crashing down. It was a small moment, but it foreshadowed the challenges ahead. Winning the war would be easy, but winning the peace would be something else entirely. Hours before that statue fell, Saddam Hussein had been photographed walking through the streets of the Adamiyah neighborhood, surrounded by cheering supporters. He climbed onto the hood of a car, waved to the crowds, and then simply disappeared. The most wanted man on earth had vanished into thin air. What happened next would haunt the American mission for years to come. The man put in charge of rebuilding Iraq, Administrator Paul Bremer, made 2 decisions in May 2003 that seemed logical at the time but would prove catastrophic. First, he disbanded the entire Iraqi army, putting 400,000 armed, trained men out of work overnight, men with guns, military training, and now no paycheck. Then he issued the de-Ba'athification order, banning anyone who had been a member of Saddam's party from government employment. In a country where Ba'ath Party membership had been required for any professional career, this meant teachers, doctors, engineers, anyone with expertise was suddenly unemployable. The intentions were understandable. The US wanted to purge Saddam's influence completely, to build something new from scratch. But with 2 strokes of a pen, Bremer had created an insurgency by destroying the livelihood of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis who knew no other life. On May 1, 2003, President Bush stood on the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln beneath a banner reading, "Mission accomplished." The major combat operations were indeed over, but the real war was just beginning. While chaos spread across Iraq, Saddam Hussein had executed a disappearance plan that would confound American intelligence for months. He abandoned every palace, every government building, every location that American analysts might expect him to use. Instead, he fled into the Sunni Triangle, the region north of Baghdad dominated by his own tribe and allied clans. These were his people, and he knew every village, every farm, every family that owed him loyalty. Saddam moved from safe house to safe house, never staying anywhere for more than a few hours. He slept in a different bed every single night, trusting only a small circle of relatives and tribal kinsmen with knowledge of his whereabouts. He grew a beard, traded his military uniforms for the simple clothes of a farmer, and became virtually unrecognizable. The man who had plastered his face on every street corner in Iraq was now just another old man in a dish dasha. But his most brilliant decision was also his simplest. He stopped using technology entirely. No phones, no radios, no computers. Nothing that could be intercepted, traced, or tracked. Every message was carried by human couriers who knew only fragments of information, never the complete picture. The couriers themselves often didn't even know they were working for Saddam, believing they were simply passing messages between resistance figures. It was primitive, slow, and maddeningly effective. American satellites could photograph every square meter of Iraq in exquisite detail, but they couldn't see inside human minds. Signals intelligence could intercept every electronic transmission in the country, but there was nothing to intercept. Saddam Hussein had become invisible by becoming primitive. In an age of technological miracles, the dictator was hiding in plain sight, protected by nothing more than blood loyalty and silence. The American military adapted with characteristic creativity. To help soldiers identify high-value targets, they created a special deck of playing cards featuring the 52 most wanted members of Saddam's regime. The idea was elegant in its simplicity. Soldiers play cards during downtime, so why not make every game a training session in facial recognition? Saddam Hussein was the Ace of Spades, the ultimate prize, with his sons Uday and Qusay as the aces of clubs and hearts. A $25 million bounty was placed on Saddam's head, with $15 million for each of his sons. In a country devastated by war and sanctions, these were life-changing sums, enough to relocate an entire extended family anywhere in the world. Tips flooded in by the thousands, but most were useless. Old grudges disguised as intelligence, neighbors settling scores, con men hoping to collect. Months passed after the fall of Baghdad, and many cards were pulled from the deck, but none of the captured officials could lead the Americans to where Saddam or his sons were hiding. The Ace of Spades remained at large. In July 2003, the breakthrough came not from billion-dollar satellites, but from something far simpler: a man who wanted money. An Iraqi walked into a military base in Mosul and told the Americans he knew where Uday and Qusay Hussein were hiding, in his own home. He wanted the $30 million reward, and he was willing to give up Saddam's sons to get it. The intelligence seemed almost too good to be true, and the military approached with appropriate skepticism. But when troops surrounded the villa the next morning, the informant's tip proved accurate. Saddam's sons were inside, and they had no intention of surrendering. The first soldiers through the door were met with a hail of gunfire, and the battle quickly escalated. For 4 hours, American forces poured fire into the building, eventually calling in Tau missiles and Mark 19 grenade launchers. When the dust settled, Uday, Qusay, and Qusay's 14-year-old son Mustafa were all dead. The bodies were so damaged that dental records were needed to confirm their identities. In an unusual decision, the military released photographs of the bodies to prove to the Iraqi people that these men were truly gone. I would never consider this a failure. Our mission is to find, kill, or capture. The message was clear. America keeps its promises, both the rewards and the reckoning. For Saddam, hiding somewhere in the Sunni Triangle, the news must have been devastating. His sons had been brutal. Uday especially was infamous for his sadistic cruelty, but they had been his heirs, his legacy, his future. With their deaths, the dynasty Saddam had built was finished. There would be no Ba'athist succession, no Hussein family ruling Iraq for generations. According to those who encountered him in the following months, Saddam fell into something like depression, his world shrinking ever smaller. But the deaths also taught him a terrible lesson. Even his own sons hadn't maintained proper security, hadn't stayed invisible, hadn't survived. His circle of trusted people shrank even further, making him harder to find, but also more isolated, more alone. The audio tape that surfaced shortly after, Saddam mourning his sons in his own voice, confirmed he was still alive, but alive and powerful are very different things. The raid proved something else. The bounty system worked. The US paid the informant the full $30 million and relocated him to America, giving him a new life far from anyone who might want revenge. The hope was that other Iraqis would see this and come forward, that the combination of money and safety would crack open Saddam's network. The message was broadcast across Iraq: help us, and we will take care of you. But as the months rolled by, that hope began to fade. Raid after raid turned up nothing. Empty houses, wrong addresses, tips that led nowhere. The problem wasn't a lack of information, it was too much of it. Thousands of leads flooding in every week with no reliable way to separate truth from fiction. American intelligence had spent decades studying the Soviet Union, learning to track bureaucracies and intercept communications and analyze satellite imagery. But tribal societies don't work like bureaucracies. Information flows through family networks, through relationships built over generations, through bonds that outsiders can barely see. The military raided palaces, searched government buildings, detained anyone who had been close to the regime. They expected Saddam to behave like other toppled dictators, to try to communicate with loyalists, organize resistance, maintain some kind of footprint. But Saddam was doing none of those things. He was simply hiding, waiting, surviving. The raids themselves were taking a toll. 3 civilians shot during one night's operation, families terrorized by soldiers kicking down doors at midnight. Every failed raid created new enemies, new reasons for Iraqis to stay silent, new obstacles to the mission. The task force hunting Saddam was learning a hard truth. You can't capture a ghost with brute force. While the bulk of the military remained focused on the deck of cards, one army interrogator decided to think differently. Staff Sergeant Eric Maddox looked at the targets everyone was chasing and saw a fundamental problem. These were men from the old regime, people who had been given positions because they were related to Saddam. Their power had come from him, not the other way around. But Saddam wasn't looking for people who owed him. He needed people who could protect him. And that could only mean one thing: his bodyguards. While in power, Saddam had maintained 3 tiers of personal protection. The outer layer guarded fixed locations like his palaces. The middle layer traveled ahead to secure areas he planned to visit. But the innermost layer, the Hamaya, these were the elite guards who stayed with Saddam at all times, who knew his movements, his habits, his hiding places. Maddox theorized that if anyone was protecting Saddam now, it had to be these men. And if he could find them, he could find Saddam. Maddox began his work in Tikrit, Saddam's hometown. The city had already been searched thoroughly, and most analysts believed Saddam wasn't stupid enough to hide so close to his known associates. But Tikrit was home to something more important than Saddam himself: the al-Muslit family. Generation after generation, the Muslits had provided bodyguards for Saddam's inner circle, bound to him by tribal loyalty that went back decades. If anyone knew where Saddam was hiding, it would be these people. As Maddox conducted interrogation after interrogation, one name kept surfacing: Muhammad Ibrahim Omar al-Muslit. The Americans gave him a code name: the Fat Man. The more Maddox learned about Muhammad Ibrahim, the more certain he became that this was the key. Muhammad Ibrahim wasn't just a former bodyguard. He appeared to be running the entire insurgent network in Saddam's absence. He had lieutenants coordinating attacks against coalition forces. He was funneling money to resistance cells. He was the spider at the center of a very dangerous web. And if Muhammad Ibrahim was operating on Saddam's behalf, then he had to know where Saddam was hiding. Finding the Fat Man became Maddox's obsession. What followed was painstaking, unglamorous work, the kind that doesn't make for exciting movies, but wins wars. Maddox interrogated a nephew of Muhammad Ibrahim, who revealed the names of 2 close business associates and Muhammad's personal driver, Basim Latif. Basim was found and questioned. So were family members of the business associates. Piece by piece, the Americans began mapping Muhammad Ibrahim's movements, his contacts, his patterns. Then they found Muhammad's son, Muslit, and brought him in for questioning. At first, the young man seemed useless. He had little involvement in the resistance and claimed to know nothing. But then he mentioned something that seemed trivial. He used to go fishing with his father at a pond in the city of Samarra. They didn't fish together anymore, but his father still went there. Maddox's mind flashed back to an earlier interrogation, weeks ago, with a former housekeeper from one of Saddam's palaces. The housekeeper had mentioned, almost in passing, that Saddam loved mazgoof, a traditional Iraqi fish dish, a tiny detail, the kind most people would forget. But Maddox hadn't forgotten. Suddenly, the trail felt red-hot. American forces raided the fish farm Muhammad Ibrahim was known to use. 2 fishermen were captured, but neither was the target. Under questioning, one fisherman revealed he was a cousin to a resistance lieutenant and mentioned an uncle they shared who had a house in Baghdad. Maybe Muhammad Ibrahim was hiding there, in plain sight, in the capital city that had been under American control for months. It was a thin lead, almost absurdly so. Think about what had brought them here. They were about to raid the apartment of an uncle of a fisherman from a fish farm, where the son of their target remembered fishing with his dad. It sounded like a joke, or a wild goose chase, but they had nothing better, so they went. And when they kicked down the door of that Baghdad apartment, Muhammad Ibrahim Omar al-Muslit was sitting inside. Against all odds, the chain of whispers had led them to the fat man. Capturing Muhammad Ibrahim was one thing. Getting him to talk was another. This was a man who had devoted his life to protecting Saddam Hussein, whose entire identity was built on loyalty and silence. Maddox questioned him personally, hour after hour, building rapport, offering protection for his family. What exactly happened in that interrogation room remains classified, and accounts differ. What is known is that Muhammad Ibrahim initially maintained the silence that had protected Saddam for so long. But under sustained questioning, something shifted. Perhaps he saw that the cause was lost, that Saddam's era was truly over. Perhaps he simply wanted to protect his family from what was coming. Whatever the reason, Muhammad Ibrahim began to talk. He revealed that Saddam was hiding in a small farming village called Ad-Dawr, just south of Tikrit. The location was almost poetic, rural tribal farmland, just 15 kilometers from the village where Saddam had been born in poverty 66 years earlier. The man who had built palaces across Iraq was hiding within walking distance of where he'd started. 2 possible locations were identified and given code names, Wolverine 1 and Wolverine 2. The decision was made to move immediately. Every hour increased the chance that word of Muhammad Ibrahim's capture would reach Saddam. 600 soldiers from the 4th Infantry Division were assigned to the mission, codenamed Operation Red Dawn after the 1984 film about resistance fighters. Delta Force operators would handle the extraction if Saddam was found. Everyone else would provide the cordon. As darkness fell on December 13, 2003, multiple convoys rolled out from the airbase at Tikrit. Muhammad Ibrahim rode with them as a prisoner. He would guide them to the locations he had described. At 8 p.m., the assault force reached Wolverine 1, a farmhouse east of the Tigris River. Soldiers swept through every building, every room, every closet, every shadow. The tension was suffocating as the force moved to Wolverine 2, another small farmhouse surrounded by date palms and sheep pens. Again, they searched everything. Again, they found nothing. The soldiers began to wonder if this was just another dead end, another false lead in a war full of them. But Muhammad Ibrahim wasn't finished. He pointed toward another structure just north of the farmhouse. Barely a shack, just 2 small rooms. Soldiers cleared it quickly. No one was inside. There must have been some final barrier in Muhammad Ibrahim's mind, some last resistance to directly betraying the man he had protected for so long. He was willing to lead them here, but he couldn't bring himself to simply point and say, "There." Instead, he walked to a spot outside the shack and began kicking at a piece of rope half buried in the dirt. The soldiers watched, confused at first. Then they understood. They pulled the rope and found a piece of styrofoam covering a narrow shaft, a spider hole just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. The hole dropped about 8 feet into darkness, with a small horizontal chamber at the bottom, barely large enough to lie down in. A tiny fan provided minimal ventilation. Without it, a man would suffocate. A soldier shouted into the blackness, ordering anyone inside to show themselves. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then 2 hands emerged from the darkness, followed by a head, followed by the most wanted man on earth. Soldiers grabbed his arms and hauled him up into the light of their flashlights. He was filthy, his hair matted, his beard long and grey, his body crawling with lice. This broken old man looked nothing like the defiant dictator who had ruled Iraq for 24 years, but it was unmistakably Saddam Hussein. Inside the hole, soldiers found $750,000 in American cash, 2 AK-47 rifles, and a pistol, but Saddam hadn't reached for any of it. The butcher of Baghdad, who had sent millions to their deaths, surrendered without firing a single shot. The next day, Administrator Paul Bremer stepped to a microphone in Baghdad and spoke 4 words that would circle the globe. "Ladies and gentlemen, we got him." The room erupted. Iraqi journalists leaped from their seats, some cheering, some weeping. Footage of the capture was broadcast worldwide. Saddam dazed and confused, military doctors examining his teeth, searching his matted hair for lice. The images were deliberately unglamorous, designed to shatter any myth of Saddam's power that might still linger in Iraqi minds. This was not a president being processed. This was a rat being pulled from a hole. In cities across Iraq, some celebrated with gunfire, while others watched in stunned silence. The man who had terrorized them for a generation was finally in American hands. For a moment it felt like the war might finally be turning a corner. But here is where the story turns bitter, where victory curdles into something more complicated. Capturing Saddam Hussein did almost nothing to end the violence in Iraq. The insurgency tearing the country apart had long since evolved beyond one man. It had become a hydra with 100 heads. Al-Qaeda in Iraq was flooding the country with foreign jihadists who had no connection to Saddam's secular regime. They hated him almost as much as they hated America. Sunni tribal fighters weren't trying to restore Saddam. They were protecting their communities from what they saw as Shia domination and American occupation. Shia militias were settling scores that went back not years, but centuries. The capture removed a symbol, but the forces driving the conflict didn't care about symbols. American soldiers kept dying, Iraqi civilians kept dying, and the country kept sliding towards civil war. The Iraq War would grind on for many more years, claiming thousands of American lives and hundreds of thousands of Iraqi lives before something like stability finally emerged. Mission accomplished became a punchline, a reminder of how badly the aftermath had been underestimated. And then there was the matter of why the war had started in the first place. During his interrogations in 2004, Saddam revealed something that cast the entire invasion in a different light. There had been no active weapons of mass destruction program. The programs had been dismantled years earlier, in the 1990s. But Saddam had deliberately maintained ambiguity, letting the world believe he might still have them. Why would he do something so reckless? Because he feared Iran more than he feared America. He calculated that the appearance of having weapons of mass destruction would deter his neighbor, would keep the Iranians from exploiting Iraq's weakness. He was willing to bluff the United States if it meant keeping Iran at bay. It was a catastrophic miscalculation, the kind of mistake that costs nations. Saddam lost his country, his sons, and ultimately his life because he was playing chess with the wrong opponent. Saddam Hussein was tried by an Iraqi special tribunal for crimes against humanity, specifically for ordering the massacre of 148 Shia villagers in Dujail in 1982. He was defiant throughout, interrupting proceedings, challenging the court's legitimacy, insisting he was still the rightful president of Iraq. On November 5, 2006, he was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. The execution took place on December 30, 2006, at a facility the Americans called Camp Justice, a name that would prove darkly ironic. Unofficial cell phone video leaked from the execution chamber showed guards taunting Saddam, chanting the name of Muqtada al-Sadr, a Shia cleric whose father Saddam had murdered. The footage undermined any pretense that this was a solemn act of justice. Saddam Hussein maintained his composure until the trapdoor opened beneath him. The butcher of Baghdad was dead, but the country he had brutalized was still bleeding. The image of Saddam in that spider hole became one of the most iconic moments in modern history, burned into the collective memory of everyone who lived through that era. It spawned countless memes, Saddam photoshopped into random hiding places, a grim joke that somehow captured the absurdity of the whole thing. Wikipedia editors fought a running battle against vandals who kept inserting Saddam into unrelated graphs and images. But that image didn't become iconic by accident. After the capture, the American military invited journalists to tour the spider hole, to see for themselves where the great dictator had been reduced to hiding like a rat. It's a miserable hiding place, particularly for a man who built some of the most ostentatious palaces in the Middle East. The photographs of his arrest, disheveled, defeated, doctors checking his teeth like he was livestock, were released deliberately. The message was clear. This is what becomes of tyrants who defy America. Both Saddam and the Americans understood something fundamental. Images carry immense power. Saddam had spent decades building a cult of personality, plastering his face on every wall, using state media to craft a myth of invincibility. The Americans needed to destroy that myth, to show Iraqis and the world that the man they had feared was just flesh and blood. The carefully staged presentation of his downfall was, in its own way, just as much propaganda as anything Saddam had ever produced. That doesn't make it false. Saddam really was a monster, and he really was pulled from that hole. But the way the story was told, the images that were chosen, the narrative that was built, all of it was deliberate. History is written by the victors, but it's also photographed, filmed, and broadcast by them. So what actually found Saddam Hussein in the end? Not the satellites that could photograph every inch of Iraq from space. Not the electronic surveillance that could intercept any signal on Earth. Not the $25 million bounty that attracted thousands of tips, most of them worthless. What found Saddam Hussein was the same thing that has brought down every hiding dictator in modern history: human betrayal. Someone who knew him, someone inside his network of family and tribe, gave him up. Manuel Noriega was caught when his network collapsed in Panama. Muammar Gaddafi was found by locals who discovered him hiding in a drainage pipe. Osama bin Laden was tracked through the courier network that kept him alive. The pattern is always the same. Technology supports the hunt, but human beings end it. Saddam Hussein spent 24 years building a system designed to protect him from exactly this kind of betrayal. Blood loyalty, tribal bonds, family ties, these were supposed to be unbreakable. But in the end, the very relationships that kept him alive were the ones that gave him up. The people closest to a dictator's secrets are also the only ones who can truly betray him. That's not just how Saddam was found. That's how they're always found.